Right, cool. Welcome back to the next video in the series of videos covering the one-day course. Let's see if we can get rid of this weird thing at the bottom of the screen. Yes, we can. So I'm going to be talking about market research. So trying to understand the research that you need to do before you launch a business to understand whether there is a need for your business, essentially. It helps you understand the feasibility, the viability of your business idea, and is vital in terms of like minimizing the risk of starting a business. Um, Market research plays a huge part in that because it's essentially you working out, is there a demand for my product before you dive in, before you make all of the decisions that sort of tie you into this idea. It may be that there's something you need to change. There's something that you need to it may be that your current idea or what you want to go forward with doesn't cater to the actual need of the customers you're aiming at. So market research is all about trying to understand the customers, trying to understand their needs, trying to understand a bit about them and how to reach them, all these important questions. And as a good starting point, what I'm going to suggest is you to take 5 minutes now to think of 5 questions that you would really want to know the answer to in order to understand how feasible and viable your business is. There's a couple of good examples already on the screen. So, what price should my product be? Is a great example of a question that everyone sort of wants to know the answer to. What can I price my product at that would make people want to buy it, but also make sure I'm getting the right value out of my time and energy and money. How much would people be willing to pay is maybe the sort of the closest sort of answer you'll get from market research. How old are my target customers? That's another question. These questions will depend on the business and depend on what's important, depend on what you already know. But yes, I'd like you to now spend 5 minutes, just write them down on the list because we'll need them for a bit later. I'd like you to spend 5 minutes writing down what are 5 questions. If you had a crystal ball, if you could get the answer to any 5 questions about your business, what would you ask? So I'll give you 5 minutes to do that if you pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you have now come up with those questions, and I'm now going to be talking about different types of market research that you can do. And while I'm going over them, I'd like you to sort of think about, right, which of these would be a way that I could find out the answers to my questions. Right, so I'll begin now. So there's two main types of market research. One is primary research and one is secondary research. I'll start, weirdly, with secondary research. Secondary research is the research that you collect, like collating information that already exists, as opposed to primary research, which is information that you yourself gather. You are the one taking that information in. So the way to do it essentially is to start with the secondary research because this is a lot easier and less time consuming than the primary research. And in the secondary research, you want to find out all the relevant information that's already out there about your business, about your market, the market you're aiming for, about everything you can that could be relevant to your business. And you'll find that there's still stuff you want to know after that secondary research because none of that will maybe be sort of specific to you or your product or service. So there'll be gaps in your understanding after you do your secondary research, and this is exactly what primary research is for. So use that primary research to fill the gaps in your knowledge after looking through the secondary research. So some examples of secondary research that's out there are things like ONS data, that stands for the Office of National Statistics, got there in the end. Also like census data, both available from government websites to help understand things about the population. So a good example of how this could be helpful in a business is if you had a business and you were decided that your target group was people over 60 in a certain area. you could then use that census data to understand, right, in this area I'm aiming at, how many people are there that are in the age group I'm aiming at, and then you understand the size of your target group in that area. So that's sort of a good source of information for demographic data. Another source of secondary research are market reports. So someone has very likely already gone out there and done research about the sector, about the market that you are aiming for, and those reports are available online. To get the very most recent reports, you may have to pay, but there's a lot of freely available reports out there as well. And through these reports, you can see trends in the market. So maybe certain areas of the market that are expanding, and maybe some that are on a bit of a downhill trend. In that way, you can understand different, the different behaviors in customers, whether people are more likely to, whether there's a growing demand for something, or a sort of a lessening demand for other things. You can also maybe understand competitor data. A lot of larger organizations will release annual reports sort of talking about how the company has done throughout the year, and through that you also may be able to understand what could be expected from that information. Another source is newspapers and journals. Again, a great source of current trends, maybe some news headlines that may impact what you're selling, and any changes in regulation should also be sort of made public in that way. But always good to stay on top, just in general, of the market you're aiming at. So if you can, surround yourself with information about, either subscribe to relevant journals or magazines related to the industry that you're aiming at. It's always good to keep on top of these things and on top of upcoming trends and changes that may come up. And now primary research, which, as I say, is research that you collect yourself. A prime example of primary research is focus groups. So focus groups are essentially you talking to people directly and asking them questions and having a conversation with people in order to understand their sort of thoughts and feelings about what you're offering. One thing I will say about this research, not just focus groups, but more or less, I say focus group surveys, any research that you aim at potential customers, or just aim at people to understand their thoughts and opinions, make sure that you find people that are going to tell you the truth. There's not much point making a focus group just full of your best mates who are just going to tell you what you want to hear. Well, I guess it depends on what kind of mates you have, but in a lot of cases, you don't want to make it so people are just placating you and just saying what you want to hear. So if you're going to do a focus group, try and make it so the focus group is full of people who you think are your potential customers, or potentially just likely to buy from you, and understand their opinions, and ask them. The advantage of a focus group, though, is that you can ask a question and have a follow-up question afterwards. So you may find you ask the question, what would you be willing to pay for this product? And they might say, £50, and you are thinking of charging 10. You can then ask a follow-up question that's like, why? Why do you value it that highly? Or, if the answer's super low, you could be like, that seems like, why do you think, what gives you that, what sort of led you to that number? Or they may give you weird, unexpected answers that you may want to follow up on. So focus groups are kind of good for getting a decent chunk of information out of people that's quite hard to quantify. It's sort of often just a long conversation. Another thing about focus groups is you don't want more than about 4 or 5 people, otherwise you just get loads of conversations happening at once, and you lose a lot of the value of those conversations because you're not able to keep track of them. Another thing to, in a lot of cases as well, when you want people to give up their time and energy to answer your questions, you may need to incentivize them. So you may need to, essentially, either offer them something in return for answering your questions, like money, or if possible, maybe just people just want time, some way to fill the time at the moment. So you might actually be able to get some people just willing to do it in order to, in return for your thanks. It depends, but in some circumstances you may need to incentivize it. Now, obviously, at the moment, I wouldn't suggest having in-person focus groups, for obvious reasons. You may want to switch that to online, whether that's through things like Google Hangouts or Zoom. Those sort of things facilitate online conversations where you don't have to meet up in person, which is obviously not advisable at the moment. Another type of primary research is secret shopping. Secret shopping is where you go through the process, at least completely or partially, of trying to buy something from a competing organization or company. And there's a lot of information you can find from doing this, not least of all pricing and understanding how much you should charge, but also understanding that company's processes, understanding how they talk to customers, what's good and bad about the services they're offering. Another sort of source of information about competition, another fantastic source of information are online reviews. Through these reviews, you can understand what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, why they're getting 5-star reviews and what's the reason behind their lower star reviews. And you can also understand, if you're able to read them, what the customers value. What are they complaining about, and what are they thrilled that they're getting? So it may be that all the 5-star reviews are because, oh my God, it's so cheap for what you're getting, and a lot of their so you may find out that the majority of people prefer a low cost option, but then you may find again a lot of negative reviews about the sort of low standards or customer support or complaints or things like that, as in like their reaction to complaints. There'll always be pluses and negatives to every company, and trying to understand what customers react well to and what do they really take offense against when they don't get from that service. Reviews an absolutely brilliant source of information to find out and information about the customers buying from the area you're looking into going into. Last but not least, in this list we've got surveys. So again, at the moment, I wouldn't encourage in-person surveys. Online surveys are the way to go at the moment. You can do them through things like Facebook. You can do them through Google Forms, SurveyMonkey. Essentially, a survey is you asking questions online and asking people to spend a bit of time answering those questions for your information. Now, one thing I would be aware of when it comes to surveys is that it's important to essentially ask the important questions. Don't ask too many questions because that you want long replies to, because essentially, SurveyMonkey came up with a report quite recently that revealed that people are most likely to spend 10 minutes answering a survey, and this number didn't change hardly at all relative to the number of questions in the survey. So if you want the learning from this is that if you want lots of high quality answers where they go into a lot of detail, you need to ask fewer questions. Otherwise, people, get survey fatigue and just spend less and less time on the questions as they go along because they just want to finish. An advantage of surveys is that you can get it's a bit easier for you to collate and collect more quantitative data. So this is data, so for example, it's a lot easier to collect stats about the person's age or the price range they'd go for, to allow you to come up with statements such as 57% of people answering the survey said that they would be willing to pay between £20 and £30. That sort of thing that's harder to, essentially not impossible, but more work to collate in a focus group. So essentially, another advantage of a survey is that it's a lot easier to get it out to loads of people with roughly the same effort. Essentially, if you're choosing between whether to do a survey or a focus group, you kind of want to, it's a bit of a balancing act, and it depends on what you're prioritizing. If you want lots of data from lots of people, you have more chance of getting it through a survey. But if you want a higher amount of data, and you want to really dig into the data you get, then focus groups, but with less people, focus groups are the way to go. It's a lot more time intensive to talk to people, 4 or 5 people at a time, than it is to just send out a blanket survey. So yeah, depends on what you want to get out of it, essentially. So yeah, I hope everyone, all the way through me talking about each of these methods, is thinking about those questions they want answered, and trying to think of, how can each of these or any of these help me find the answer to my question. And in some of the cases, it may be that secondary data is the way forward. In some cases, you may need to drill down into it and go for primary research, which is fine. So here are some top tips, just in general, for conducting market research. Don't just fling yourself into it. Have a structure and a purpose to it. As I say, go about it methodically. Start with secondary, then go to primary, and have a real good think about what is the best strategy to get the information you need, rather than just sort of rushing a survey or rushing into other methods that may not give you your bang for your buck. Don't collect information for the sake of it. Really understand and drill down the questions that you need answered and prioritize those. As I say, always do secondary research first. It'll take you less time. Identify the right primary research technique. As I said, there's different advantages and disadvantages to focus groups and surveys. You need to prioritize what's right for you. Survey fatigue, yeah, absolutely. That's what I was saying about not, just flinging loads of questions at people. Instead, ask them the concise questions that you want to know the answer to. And also, make sure, it is very valuable to collect market research even after you started your business. You'll in fact be in a bit of a better place to get that research, because you'll be able to get it from existing customers as well, which is a very, very good source of information, because they are the ones interested. They are your target market. They're the ones interested in your product. So don't ever stop collecting market research. Don't stop being on top of the sort of sector that you're interested in. Keep collecting that information, and now you can collect information. Oh, excuse me. So, just gonna take a drink of water. See, that's what I'm saying. I bet you're glad you're not in a room with me. So the advantage of collecting research after you started a business is that you can now do research on from your customers, asking for feedback on what you're doing, on things like marketing, your product, their experience, and you can use that to improve your service based on their feedback. That, as I say, the difference between a company improving and a company staying stagnant is taking on feedback and being willing to change. So yeah, so far we've covered thinking as a business, being in that sort of mindset, different business structures. We've talked a little bit about sustainability, and now we've talked about market research. I think this is the time when we'd usually go for lunch in the day course. So please feel free to take a break. And if you have any questions, please send them on to bss@pne.org, and we can help. If you have any queries as you go, we can help answer those. Not a worry. Right, so I'll see you in the next video.